I had gone. A friend of mine had like texted me, like kind of at the last minute, being like, he's a Fulham supporter, and he was like, I'm watching the Carabao Cup second leg, and I need emotional support. And I was like, all right, I'll go by. And I just thought it would be done before it was done, and then I was like, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to get home in time for this. So I was watching a soccer match and just didn't calculate my distances correctly. I'm sorry.
The thing about soccer that you should know is that it lasts forever, that it's literally unending. So,
I had done the math though. Like I knew like theoretically like when it would be done, but then I was just like, I hadn't adequately understood how far away the place I had met him was from my house.
It sounded like you were there for moral support. Are you a soccer fan?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, like I don't. At various times in my life, I've watched it with more persistence and intention than I really do at the moment. But I like it. I'm interested in it. I watch all the international tournaments. Normally, watch the Champions League knockout stages. That's about as far as I go these days.
I tend to ebb and flow with sports, like for all sorts of reasons, and a lot of the times it's the ebbing part of it is the realization that I get way too emotionally invested in this thing that I shouldn't, like, you know what I mean? Like that whether or not I am, the mood that I'm in on a given day shouldn't be dependent on what a bunch of millionaires did on a field somewhere.
That's totally fair. I feel like that used to be more true for me. I feel like I've gotten better at like compartmentalizing my emotional reaction to it. But at the same time, like, that's not universally true, certainly. I'm a
49ers fan, and there's a decent chance they're going to be in the Super Bowl, so I'm probably going to be going through the cycle once again in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's you got a good football team over there. That's a confusing football team, but a good football team nonetheless.
I have a terrible baseball team, and I had a recently very good but now not great basketball team. So it's like a nice thing about originally being from the Bay Area is that like there's usually one that's doing pretty okay at any given time.
I feel like it's been a good like 10 or 15 years for the region. I mean, like
basketball had a good run.
Notably accepting. Are you an Athletics fan or a Giants fan?
Oh, I'm an A's fan, so everything hurts.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you've got a degree of loyalty to some U.S. sports, having, I guess, not been from here originally, but having spent a lot of your life here and growing up here.
Not like, honestly, I kind of like, I have lived in Toronto long enough that I've sort of shifted my loyalties. Like, I also like all of the teams, because I grew up like in the area where I was a fan of all the DC area teams, and like with the exception of the Orioles, who I have a certain love for, all those teams were like pretty easy to abandon for one reason or another. Like obviously like the football team is like objectionable on a number of levels. Like the Wizards have been essentially bad forever. Even when they were good, they were bad. So it's like it's easy to sort of to step away from them. I'm a very dedicated Bills fan, Buffalo Bills fan, but that's kind of the local team for Toronto. And I feel like increasingly committed to the Toronto Blue Jays and the Raptors. Like a little bit more every year almost. I build more as I build more memories of fandom, the realer it becomes.
The Raptors have had a pretty decent run. The Orioles that's not dissimilar from my situation with the A's.
I was going to say,
you were where we are now a couple of years ago, but things have been looking up, it seems like.
Yeah, I feel like the sort of like it's like a similar but different like noxious ownership situation, and like there's some things that tie it together for sure.
It's the guy who does Diamond Distribution, the comics distribution, is the guy who owns the.
Oh, is that? Yeah, I knew he had like involvement in various print media. I didn't realize that was part of it. D'Angelo is. But yeah, that makes sense. he's an absolute ghoul, and his sons are even worse.
To Buffalo now, given what's transpired, it was a good run, and it was better than anybody thought. And this isn't a sports podcast, but I'm interested in all these topics.
I'm sorry, I feel like I pulled us in this direction.
I mean, that was an interesting period during. What was that? I guess 2021. 2020 it must have been when the Blue Jays were playing in Buffalo.
Yeah, that was happening. I feel like that was weird. I feel like it kept switching around. Like it was like some of it they were playing in Florida, some of it they were playing in Buffalo. If I'm remembering correctly, like it kind of shifted a couple of times. But yeah, they weren't allowed across the border. I mean, there was a brief moment that was kind of interesting where like the Blue Jays were a World Series favorite specifically because of like the border crossing stuff, where it was like there were significant numbers of players on like their rivals who refused to get vaccinated and therefore weren't allowed to play in Canada, and that was viewed as being like such a meaningful advantage that it like might actually win them like an extra 5 games in the division. It didn't, but it would have been really funny if it did.
It's a thing that we learn now that like social media is so prevalent. How many of our sports heroes are just complete fucking assholes?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that is. You do find out a little bit more about them. Like, I wonder if we'd like in a slightly different era, if we'd like think that Aaron Rodgers was a totally different kind of asshole. Probably.
We had Ty Cobb, and you know, it's not that we had a dearth of like really bad dudes playing professional sports at any point, but now it's the thing of you know, it's I'm conflicted about this to a certain degree. Is the like, oh, when you were a stupid 15-year-old, you used the N-word on Twitter, like that thing of like tweets very very bad and stupid tweets resurfacing from when people were in like middle school.
I feel like that's like a kind of an interesting thing in general, though, of like the. Like, I feel like it's, like, actually indicative of a meaningful shift of, like, what social media is and, like, how it works. In that, like, there was a brief period of time, like, maybe 2 or 3 years, where, like, every time, like, a relatively unheralded Major League Baseball prospect got his first start, like, by the third inning, they would have, like, found him using a racial slur on Twitter when he was 14. And now that, like, just doesn't happen anymore. And I think it's, like, it's not that they've gotten better at scrubbing their Twitters, it's that, like 21-year-old guys never had social media. maybe had Instagram, maybe, but like they're not using it in the same way, and it's like that is kind of what makes the difference.
I also assume that the sort of the handlers that they have are watching that stuff much more closely than they would have several years ago.
I wonder, because it felt like there was a several-year period where like that just lesson did not get learned. But yeah, like I think there's probably a few factors weighing into it.
I only say conflicted. It's just because it's like it's obviously terrible. It's obviously terrible in any situation, and I've certainly never used like the F slur in any context at all. But it also, like, I certainly did a lot of really stupid things on the internet when I was a certain age, and the idea of those like being held over me as a young adult is horrifying. That there would have been, you know, and you know, I'm of an age that I also don't have the same paper trail that they have now, because it didn't really exist in that form when I was a teenager. And the idea of the things that I thought existing online forever is horrific.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's kind of what I mean. I feel like it's like it felt permanent because we were living through it or something. But it's like actually that was a relatively short period of time where like unfettered access to social media was being like granted to 12-year-olds to like do dumb shit with and then get in trouble for like when they became professional athletes. And it's like that window has shifted. No, this is not a particularly important observation, just one that I had made at one point.
For you personally, I mean, you know, we were talking a little bit about the border crossing situation with the Blue Jays. What role did social media, or just, I guess, the internet generally play in your ability to make music over the last 3 or 4 years?
I mean, I don't know that it really factored too much. I mean, it inevitably does, because it's like, you know, that's a big part of where everything exists now. But like, I mean, like, we were mostly making our music in person for most of that time, even if, like, I mean, it was mostly just me and Evan, so like that kind of like created some, we were in a situation
you had a
where
pod.
do that. Yeah, basically. And it's like I think, like, you know, there were some things that we were able to do because of that were that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But like they were mostly the kind of like normal things that you do, that it wasn't, like pandemic related. It was just sort of like, oh, like, yeah, like we're mixing the record in a different place than like one of us is. So we're like sending mixes back and forth or whatever. But it's like, we did that on this record too. And we made it in a summer in which there were no restrictions. Yeah. I mean, there were a few like little things, but I think it's like stuff that it would have just been the same. Like where it's like, we wanted a certain person to sing on something and we couldn't get in a room with them. And so we just had him do it. But I mean, like the thing that we weren't able to do on the first record was like really get in a space and collaborate with people that wasn't just the two of us. And we were able to do that on this record, which was cool. It was like, I think it added an extra dimension to sort of like be able to go and do this thing we'd never really gotten to do and just sort of like bounce ideas off other people and get their input and stuff like that, which was, I don't know, but definitely it's kind of more fun to do it that way. And I think the results are also more interesting. How important to your process and the way the two of you do things is it that you do a big chunk of this in person? I don't think we could do it differently, just because of the way we write. Like, it's like, it kind of is this like we tend to just like pass an instrument back and forth and like add layers to something, and like a lot of the process is just sort of like you take a section, you loop a section, then you try and play something over it, and then the other person is like decides whether or not that works or how it should change, and we kind of edit from there. I mean, I guess we probably could do it. It would just take a lot longer. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty like while we kind of like is not quite intentionally is not like a band playing in a room kind of thing. It is like, yeah, there's a lot of just direct communication and talking about sort of all the elements. Yeah, which I think would be very slow to do it in another way. It seems to me that like a big thing that you were looking for in your many other years being in previous bands was a songwriting partner, that was the thing that kind of liberated this part of you. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I've always, I mean, like, to some extent, I think it's like that it was like, a lot of it with this band was sort of Evan, like Evan, me and Evan, like, having kind of like complementary skills, and I think he's a person who has a lot of sort of like follow through and believes in hard work, and in like, finishing the thing once you've started it, which is a thing that I kind of struggle with. So I think that's like definitely is a big part of it, where it's like I'm quick to like lose faith in an idea, and therefore like just sort of leave it. Whereas yeah, he is not like that at all, which is like a very positive trait and a very helpful thing, I think, in us getting stuff done. When you say lose faith in an idea, like how does that play out generally? Oh, I'll just like start working on something, and then as soon as it becomes hard, I'll decide that that's because it's bad, and then I won't want to do it anymore. like that's kind of, yeah, that's a consistent pattern with songwriting for me. That's interesting to me, because this is something that I like to specifically talk to people who write songs about. Is there is this idea in pop songwriting that the ones that come the fastest are the best, the ones that like that, you're like channeling the muse or whatever, the ones where you wake up in the morning and you've hummed something into your tape recorder and, it ends up being the riff for satisfaction. And to a certain extent, that does seem to fit in, reading you talk about 18 Cigarettes, which both you and like pretty much everybody agreed was the best song on that record. That's one that came together extremely quickly. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that's true. Yeah, that one was like pretty quick, and I think like I felt good about it pretty quickly. I don't know, it's definitely a mixed bag though. Like I think like there's like the one on this record that so far seems to be the one that people are the most excited about was like it was not easy to write and it took forever. Train Full of Gasoline. The parts, I guess when I wrote them kind of came quickly, but it was like figuring out how to make them work and fit them together was not. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I think it's like sometimes that is the case where it does like kind of come in a rush and you can figure it out. But I also think that like even in those songs, there's normally like a detail or two that is really hard to finalize, and like that becomes a whole separate part of the process that can take a lot longer. I remember like seeing, I think it was like Stefan from Pup like tweeted this at one point. I'm just like that like every song has like one line that you couldn't get right and you work on forever, and like most of the time you just put it out and no one ever notices. But I feel like that's true of pretty, like almost all of them, where there's always something that I'm like deeply dissatisfied with and then like try and fix. And then it's like time to record the vocals and I still haven't fixed it. And it's just like, okay, I guess that's going to be there. And then no one ever says anything about it. Like it's a weird, I don't know. It's a weird psychological game, I think, like writing this stuff and trying to make it good.
You know what the next logical question on my end is what is that line in this song?
I think that's also part of it. It's like you stop remembering. I forget like what, like eventually you've just like sung it enough times that it works and it goes away. I'm trying to remember. There was something that bothered me about it. I think it's the something in the chorus that just didn't quite scan right to me. And I kept trying to rewrite it or write around it. And eventually I just gave up. It's kind of hard to like think about it abstractly now, because it's sort of like, especially because we toured that record and stuff in the way that we did, and we played it so many times that now it's like I can't like remember the lyrics, but I just like if I started we started playing it, I would absolutely know them. But it's like I don't have them in like a conscious part of my brain right now.
Well, that strikes me as a good sign then that like whatever that glaring thing to you was at the time has since faded away. That means that at least to a certain extent that it works.
Yeah, it means it was probably fine. I think it's just like the thing itself is always hard when you're trying to do it.
It was the thing that if Evan wasn't around, that would have hung the song up for you, and you might not have finished it.
Yeah, probably. I think that's probably right. Yeah.
When you talk about it not scanning correctly, are you talking about like meter, about the way the words fit in the song?
Let me look it up.
Are you just reading the lyrics now, or do you have this like written down somewhere? Okay.
No, I'm just looking it up. I just Googled the lyrics to the song.
There's a file on your desktop that just says like problems.
No, I just Googled the lyrics to our own song. Sorry. Oh yeah, it was the last line of the chorus. I thought it was. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the way. I wish that I could say where it got me, but that's not me. I didn't think it sounded like natural phrasing, but I think it's okay. Like
it's not meter. It's just the language that makes sense. See,
it's different things. There's other ones that annoy me in different ways.
There's a central metaphor to the song. Was that there from the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it was like, I think that one like. Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, that one, yeah, it was kind of, it came, the first verse was like something that came pretty naturally, and then I sort of like, when I got to the end of it, I realized like, oh, that's like it. Like, that's a thing that I can kind of work off of. Yeah, but I think that was like how it went. Honestly, I'm sorry, it is like a thing that I like, it was long enough ago that it's like actually hard to totally recall.
It strikes me as the kind of song that like, its existence hangs on that metaphor, just given like the source material and how it relates to the subject matter.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was something that a friend had told me about it, like kind of the day before I wrote that song, I think. So I was just kind of thinking about it as a thing that happened, and like had read about it, and yeah, like I mean, it like as I read about it, I think that was the thing that kind of like struck me about it, and the thing that I thought was interesting was that like there are certainly like parties responsible for like the thing that occurred, but it was like there was no like single act that like directly resulted in the outcome, like that it was just sort of like a series of like little negligences, little like failures to address something that needed to be addressed that just sort of like silently compounded each other. And then, sort of resulted in an outcome that no one could have predicted. from any of the individual events that precipitated it. And I thought that was sort of an interesting. I thought that was something that I think had sort of resonance in other contexts. I think that's a very sort of a familiar pattern of human folly, if you will.
That's the case with most of these things, to a certain extent, I think, is that like very few things are just one specific instance, and it all ties back to infrastructure, basically, in this case.
Yeah, or I don't know. I mean, that thing happened because the rail company had cut staff and individuals were inadequately trained, and certain people I forget all the details of it now, but it was a bunch of there were some larger structural issues, but also the things on the day were a lot of just relatively innocuous forgetting to put the hitch on the handbrake things that just sort of no one of them alone would have created this result. It was just sort of all of them together. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I say, it seems like it's a not uncommon pattern.
These are the things that I assume, now that I'm thinking about it, that these are perhaps the mistakes that are often the most difficult to learn from if you can't single out that one thing. If laying off a bunch of people, if cutting staff was part of the problem, but not the only problem, then certainly that's not going to stop the company from doing that in the future.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's it's why these things are hard to address. I think it's why they not specifically this catastrophe, but I think the metaphorical errors that I am kind of driving at there. I think it's it's a similar thing. It's if it was easy to not do that stuff, then people wouldn't do it.
There's a parallel to a slightly older song, and you use the phrase inertia of depression, which I liked, which jumped out at me, which strikes me as similar in that it's both this idea of something that for whatever reason that you can't break out of.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's it's hard to sort of it's hard to sort of view one's psychological state from outside of it. I think fundamentally you cannot do that, which is I think the crux of the issue. And I think it tends to be that things start moving in one direction and they'll keep going in that direction. Absent an effort being made to stop that momentum, I guess. I mean, I think that's probably a thing that comes up in more than one of our songs.
Is there a way in which, though, that creating things, that writing songs, that putting things out in the world is an attempt to reflect on these things that are difficult to see about yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's honestly the way that I tend to write them. It creates a scenario I'm not always aware when I'm writing them of what I'm doing until maybe halfway through the process. So I think it's it does become, in some ways a reflective thing where you kind of realize in what direction you're going without having initially sort of decided upon it, at least for me. And I think that is a way to sort of, in some ways, tease those things out.
Halfway through the process is actually pretty good from what I understand. I am constantly, can't remember who I last spoke to about this, but I'm constantly hearing about these stories about somebody figuring out what a song that they wrote was about decades after it was written.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And I think, sometimes it's I kind of will see something in it even later on where I'll be kind of become more aware of something I was doing that I didn't maybe even realize I was doing. But I think it's normally like it'll just be kind of like almost like pure, like not stream of consciousness, but it's just sort of like I'm like letting the words fit together or something when I first start something out, and then it's like I'll kind of be like, oh, like that's kind of where I'm going, and I'll be able to sort of like build direction around that.
I mean, it also strikes me that there's an attempt to, in all of this, to deal with the things in life that aren't so black and white. Like this idea of addressing people growing apart versus like just specifically a breakup. It's a subtler concept, and and for that reason, I assume that it's a harder one perhaps to, I guess, really just address.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think like, I feel like that maybe gives me more credit for like my initial intention than I deserve. Like I think it's more a thing where it's just sort of like, you know, like that's a thing that's on my mind, and so I try and like, you know, I start working on something and then I try and kind of elucidate it in a way that makes sense. Rather than maybe being something where I'm like, this is a thing that I want to write about. Like I've occasionally like done that, and it's kind of gone okay. But more often than not, I feel like if I start with an intention, I'll like either like fly off the rails and end up doing something else, or it'll be like a bit of a trap, and I'll just sort of get stuck in there. I think it's why like I really admire people who like are good at political songwriting, because I think that like in order to do that, you have to sit down and try and do it. And like that part of it, there are many parts of it that are hard, but I think that part of it is in and of itself like kind of a pretty challenging thing to do without kind of writing something that's sort of stilted.
What does it mean though to write a song without intention though? Like what are the initial steps in that process?
I mean, it's like, I don't know, I feel like almost like subconscious. It's just sort of like I'll like figure out some chords that go together that I like, and like figure out a melody that goes over it, and then like kind of gradually like a sort of like an idea for meter will turn into words, or I'll realize that there are sort of like some words in the idea, and then like kind of just start making them fit together. Just start kind of being like, oh, like that's like a compelling image, that's how this could fit to that, like, and then like you kind of realize that there's something there that like suggests something, and like I think that's like when I kind of will engage with it. But it's normally like the thing is sort of like half formed. It's sort of like a part of an idea, and then like I'll like then that sort of happens without me really thinking about it, or like at least not thinking about it in a kind of like top down way. And then once you've kind of got those pieces in play, then it's like, okay, like this actually does suggest something, or this could fit into this thing that I have separately been thinking about, or whatever. And like sometimes that's like like, you know, it'll just be like I'll start out with like an idea for imagery that I like. Like it'll just be like something that I'm like, oh, that's like like that's an interesting idea to try and sing about that, and then like that's maybe the starting point, and then I kind of like see where it can fit, and then like we'll find the way from there. And like often with these songs too, it's like I'll kind of write the first verse and the chorus and then leave them, and then like we'll just be turning over a second idea for a while, and then find a way to put it together. Like the main thing was a good example of that, where it's like I had like the first verse and the idea, the kind of like baseball analogy, like I had that for a long time, and I like thought it worked, but I didn't really know where it went.
We were talking about baseball earlier, and it is an interesting one, and it's not something, because it's not relief pitchers, it's middle relief pitchers, which, you know, maybe people who don't follow baseball that closely understand the distinction, and for that reason, I think it's a really interesting metaphor. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I mean, I kind of liked it. I think, you know, that it's like almost like uniquely unglamorous position. Like which I think was sort of the idea that I liked about it.
You're not getting the win, probably. You're you're almost like filling up space in between.
Yeah, like you're not like necessarily like all that important. There's not a lot of glory in like, I mean, I guess like they're trying to phase him out of the game too. But like there's not a lot of glory in that particular role. Which, I thought kind of worked in context. But yeah, like that was one where it's like I had that. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. I was playing around with it for a while. I got it to fit into like a thing and fit into a chorus. And then like I was stuck on like where the song went from there for a really long time. And then had like this separate thing that I was playing with when I got really, really interested in like black magic and its like history in LA, and like the sort of like thematic like cults there, and like all of these like these things that were involved in it. And I got like really interested in that, and I was like, that's like a thing that I think could like at some point, like I think it would be cool to try and use like summoning the Age of Horus as a metaphor. and then I like managed to find a place where it fit, and like I kind of realized like over time, just after like playing with that I was like, oh, this actually kind of works. But it was one of those ones that like, that song sat around in a half finished state for like 6 months or something before I realized that I had some things that would work and fit together.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a big difference between finding a good metaphor that works in a song and like writing a song about the occult in Los Angeles.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like I think in like somebody else's hands, like that could probably also be cool.
There's a great Mountain Goat song in there, probably.
Yeah, no, for sure. Or like just like a wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald song about like Jack Parsons would be like, I would listen to that for sure.
Gordon Lightfoot.
But yeah, totally. Another great Canadian. Yeah, just like I don't know. That's it's not a thing that I've ever been able to sort of like do to my satisfaction, I guess.
It's an interesting topic for me because in a lot of ways I feel the opposite. Now, granted, I'm not a songwriter, but for me, it's a lot easier to enter into a piece of writing with a sense of intentionality of like, at least beginning from a place that I feel like it, and it doesn't necessarily need to go in that direction, but having some goal from the outset can be very helpful in the process of writing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I think it's just like different kinds of writing, really. Yeah, I think like it's I think that's like kind of a thing that I maybe like about songwriting, or and maybe something that I feel like I've hopefully gotten like a little bit better at. That it's like that it's allowed to be kind of nebulous, that you can let it be that way and it still works. Like it's sort of more like you don't need to sort of concretely define your intention for it to be legible, which I think is not true of prose normally. And like, yeah, is a thing about it that I have sort of like tried to relax into a little bit.
You said half jokingly, I assume that I was giving you too much credit on as far as intentionality goes. But at the end of the day, I wonder ultimately whether intention really matters.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's like, yeah, I think it's maybe semantic, but it's like a difference between being like coming at it with a specific intention and a goal versus like being deliberate in its execution. And I feel like it's like the stuff, like I definitely, the way that I write these things, it's like I try and be I try and like waste as few words as possible. I try and make sure, like I think about all of it a lot, and I don't normally let something lie. Like it's like the way that I tend to like work on lyrics, it's really like there'll be a first draft, and then I will email them to myself, and then I'll just like, it'll be like an email thread with like 10 to 20 replies in it of just like editing it back and editing it back and editing it back, and like often like changing it. I like to do it like that because it's then you can kind of see the record of the previous iteration and like really easily and be like, okay, well, like that was actually maybe better before. But it's like there's a lot of like, you know, I'm trying not to like I like, for better or worse, I guess, I'm trying not to leave anything loose. It's just that like when I start, I don't normally know where I'm going.
I think I know the answer to this question, but do you have a problem with overthinking?
Like in general? Yeah, I think so.
Yes, in general. I'm curious just in your life generally, but also how that manifests itself in your songwriting.
Yeah, I think so. I think like that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that like I feel like I've gotten a little bit better at letting stuff hang sometimes. That it's like I'm trying to learn to not do that. But I'm sure like, you know, like Dave, who produced our record, he would definitely say that yes, I have a problem with overthinking. It's very easy to do. I think that's kind of also just the state of. I think that's the way that most things are in the context of like making a record in general. I think like there are some bands, you know, like I feel like I'm sure like the Big Thief guys or like the King Gizzard guys or whatever don't suffer from that. And they're kind of doing a different thing and their thing is cool. But I feel like for the most part, it's like, you know, you get wrapped up in this thing that you're put a lot of time and energy into and it's sort of like permanence. And it's very easy to kind of get tied up in psychological knots over trying to make it as good as you can make it.
This gets back to that idea of the best songs coming quickly. It's hard not to feel as somebody who suffers from deep anxiety and absolutely deals with overthinking in every aspect of my life. It's hard not to be jealous of those people for whom it seems to just come effortlessly.
Yeah, I'm sure it. I'm sure in some contexts it does, but I feel like it's just like with music stuff, it's like that's sometimes part of the. It's just a different appeal. Like King Gizzard is an example. Me and Evan are both like fans of those guys. Part of the like appeal of it is that some of it is kind of underthought, like that it's like a little half baked and a little goofy, and it's like it's like the
Ramones. It's just dumb and fun.
It's enjoyable for that reason. Yeah, I think like the thing that maybe comes more naturally to me and Evan is not that. I don't think we're very good at that. Like, which is fair enough.
Do you feel that like that going forward that you'll attempt to be maybe a little bit looser or more abstract in your approach?
No, I don't.
I mean, like, obviously this is working for you, so, it's not a problem on that front.
We've tried to do that to see if it would be interesting, and the answer has always been that it was not particularly, I think that's the thing that, like, that we've kind of learned is that it's like, we like going over the details. Like it's actually a part of the process that we have fun doing for the most part. And it is sort of like the key to making the thing that we do work, insofar as it works. Like, I think that's like, it's pretty, the kind of like the detail oriented iterative thing is a big part of our approach. And I don't think we would give it up, easily without a fight.
Are there times that makes it difficult for it to get out the door?
When it used to be more of an issue, I think. But I think we've gotten the process has been more streamlined. I mean, the joke used to be that that Evan's mental health suffering was what made it good. But we've kind of gotten outside of that. I think now it used to be like when we made the first EP, especially, it was like, Evan's like kind of perfectionist streak, and like both like desire and willingness to just like pour over it forever and ever and like keep trying to fix it and keep trying to make it better. It would result in like cool results in some ways, but it would also result in a lot of like churn and a lot of stuff that didn't need to happen. But I think we've kind of like through that, we've like figured out the techniques a little bit. We figured out how to get the results that we're looking for and which parts of the process are waste a little bit more, which I think has like kind of calmed it down. And I think that was a nice thing about working with Dave on this record, having like an outside voice, was I think it just kind of like it helps a lot to have to sort of just like be able to ask someone else outside of our process that like who we trust to be like, like, is this done? Is this fine? And like, I think that kind of like takes a lot of like allows things to like kind of run a bit smoother in some ways, I guess.
I wonder if part of sort of the overthinking or the difficulty, or I guess like, you know, and again, tongue in cheek, but talking about mental health in you know, compulsion is maybe a word that comes up, but I wonder how much of that this has to do with like when you're writing songs that are in some cases based around this parallel between societal collapse and interpersonal issues, then it's like it can be difficult not to be a little bit miserable in that process.
Yeah, I mean, I like I say, like it's like I think the ways in which like the process is fraught for us are like the very common ones that I think just affect trying to make records. Like for the most part, like I don't like I think you know, we're both very invested in it, and like I'm part of my investment in it is maybe that like these songs you know, like mean something to me. But I think it's you know, like for the most part, it's like we have fun doing it. It's just like I think there's normally a part near the end where it just makes us both kind of anxious and we get wound up. But I think that's also like, you know, that's just doing something you care about. There's
definitely a sense of fascination for you. You know, I can't remember what interview or piece on you that I was reading that mentioned like part of your COVID recovery process was reading about the Bronze Age collapse. So like obviously there's a big fascination for you in societal collapse.
I forgot that made it into print somewhere, into pixels. Yeah, that was I was very sick, and I did read about the Bronze Age collapse for many days in a row. That was like, I think that was more of a fascination with like the collapse part was less. Because I mean, that's the thing that was kind of interesting about it, is that the collapse, like, it might actually be that there was no collapse. That the collapse is like is in fact like an artifact of a sort of like an era of like significantly less peer-reviewed archaeological publishing. But what was interesting to me about that was basically that it was just sort of an era of European history, or not European history strictly, like, but like history in sort of like the Mediterranean and into Northern Europe, and like in like sort of that general region of the world, about which I knew almost nothing, and it was very fascinating to get into it. I love those kinds of history things. I've gotten like that David Gran book about the Amazon. I was really into 1492. I really liked, like, you know, that's stuff that I find super interesting, and I think that's kind of what I found interesting about it. Was like reading about like Bronze Age Europe. There were like there were parallels to reading about sort of like indigenous cultures of the Americas in sort of the ways that like both in the ways that like what evidence we have from the archaeological record, and also in some ways in some like sort of cultural elements of sort of social organization. And I found that really interesting. I went on about that for way too long, but I did read a lot about the Bronze Age. I completely
get it. As I get older, I understand more and more why there's this middle-aged man fascination with reading history. Like, I don't know what it is, but at a certain point in my life, like that I was reading all fiction, and then like a switch flipped in my head, and all I wanted to read about was, you know, World War II or the Civil War. Like, I completely get that fascination.
It's interesting. I'm a big Civilization 6 player. You know, I think that like ties in on both sides. So yeah,
because you're talking about like real far back, not prehistory, but you know the development of societies.
Well, I mean, in a sense, prehistory, right? Because it's like the thing that is one of the things that like is interesting about both of these things is like, so certainly sort of like a lot of Europe in this sort of like Bronze Age, pre-Bronze Age period is like pre the written word, which is like also a similar thing in a lot of though not all of like the sort of indigenous cultures of the Americas that we just don't have a written record. So it's like it becomes like there's sort of some similarities that you find just because it's like in reading about them, because it's just like it's sort of like physical evidence being interpreted and extrapolated upon without, sort of contemporary sources.
Because I think what you were getting at earlier is the idea that this specific collapse was a collapse is something that was perhaps introduced like well after the events actually happened because there were shortcomings as far as historical record.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea, that it's sort of like that. There's like one set of thinking that it was basically like the term Bronze Age collapse was like coined by one guy in like the 60s, I think. And like that basically like he had like willfully misinterpreted some evidence in order to kind of like tie all these ideas together into one sort of like broad historical concept.
He had a good title for a book, and then he built his theory around
like
that.
He maybe kind of worked backwards, from like the exciting idea, where like it was actually like that. These were sort of like a few sort of city-states that like went down around the same time, but like not really in a related way. And then like, there's other things that are like, aren't there, where it's like, there isn't even evidence of a sudden collapse, but he interpreted it as such. And it's now been sort of reassessed. And they think like, no, probably not. There's a bunch of fun ideas in that, because also a lot of it's kind of speculative, which is also sort of fun. Of like sort of things that were there, reasons that it happened, or like what the sort of social situation was at the time. There's one that I thought was particularly fanciful, that essentially like this like that like there had been this sort of like growth of a like multinational warrior caste that was like basically like a large group of mercenaries like traveling around like Europe and the Mediterranean at like serving various like barons and kings.
You're describing Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. No, that had become too powerful, and like this is like the like what precipitated this collapse is like these guys essentially like turning on their masters. But there's like there's very little evidence for that, but it's like it's a thing that like people have written about. I don't know. It was like a fun couple of days on Wikipedia for me.
I think that's an underrated thing about studying history is when you stumble on something that causes you to just completely rethink all of these like fundamental ideas that you have about a specific topic.
Yeah, I mean that's like 1492 is a really cool one for that reason. I feel like a lot of people read that one, but it's it really like kind of changes your perspective on both on sort of like the history that like that most people were taught in school about people in the Americas, and then also sort of like the scale of the tragedy of like what colonization was contextually is like just different with that in the context of some of the information in that book, in raw numbers and in other ways.
I do feel like specifically that subject is one that like, and this is, I think this is a testament to why it's important to have more kinds of people from more different walks of life involved in writing and the entertainment industry, is that there is a big push to tell some of the stories right now. I was thinking I don't know if you read, speaking of Canada, I don't know if you read Kate Beaton's last book, Ducks. Fittingly, it's called Ducks. But it's about the oil sands in Canada and working there. And, there's a lot about, because I think something that I didn't I didn't recognize until fairly recently as an American is that like with the residential schools and everything, Canada wasn't much better than we were as far as treating Indigenous people. Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like that's a funny thing about Canada. I feel like it often I feel like its own perception of itself is often sort of based on like this sort of like reflexive, like at least we're not at least we're not as bad as the Americans thing, which is like both like an odd way to define yourself and also often not true historically.
But it is a very Canadian thing, and understandably so from the standpoint that like obviously America has very outsized influence on the world, and the population is much larger, and the two countries are so close, language wise, obviously, and but just in terms of culture, that it's impossible to not, as a Canadian, I assume to a certain extent, compare yourself to the U.S.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like it in some ways, I think it like is an impetus behind some of the better like parts of like the politics here, which I think is not unique to Canada. Like I think it's like I feel like you often have kind of like situations where like that kind of like oppositional like definition does result in those things. I mean, it even happens within Canada. I think there's like a lot. There's a really like the sort of like the movement. The sort of like green movement in Quebec, I think like at least some element of that, of the politics behind that is in opposition to, the rest of the country here, and the way that it's, the way that they're sort of like, that I think like in some ways like that does like sometimes spur positive things. Like it, I think like part of the reason like the people here are so proud of our nationalized healthcare is because America doesn't have it. Like and like I think there's like a lot of examples of things like that where it's like it actually is kind of it ends up being a positive thing in the way that like you kind of get there, but yeah, I don't know. It's like I feel like you see it in other places too. Like in the way that like Scotland is progressive and pro-European versus like England. I think it's like some of that is coming in opposition as well too, as well as just like, people liking those things. You
were born in the UK, you were raised in the US. How did you end up there?
Just like my dad's work stuff.
You moved, your family moved there and then you stuck around.
Yeah, I went to the University of Toronto.
What's kept you there?
I like it. I don't know.
fair enough.
It's a good
it seems like a good place, and I don't know. Like I think you're a citizen now, and I don't know how. I don't know how something like CanCon applies to bands whose members are from outside the country, but Canada does seem like a much better place to try to be in a band at the level that your band is at.
There's definitely some cool things. Yeah, I mean, I think like, the funding stuff is definitely not perfect. But it is like a cool thing. And I'm like grateful for the stuff that we do get, obviously. And I think it's like, I like that that is a thing that happens in this country. And some stuff that happens especially in some other provinces, like, I mean, like some of the stuff that Quebec does is really, really cool. And it's kind of just like changes the entire like structure of how like the arts industries can function in a way that I feel like could and should be sort of a model for how other parts of the world do it. It's definitely a cool thing. Like, I mean, it has like, I think some pitfalls as well. I think we don't in some ways fit into its like main line maybe, but I don't think that's like necessarily because we're not from here originally. We've been, as soon as you're a permanent resident, you qualify as part of the whole thing. So we've been permanent residents pretty much the whole time this band's existed.
One of the big downfalls seems to be touring across the country seems extremely difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that is like, I think the biggest structural kind of thing. And a thing that like, that like, it would be cool to see some of that kind of like that grant stuff and the sort of the people who organize and facilitate that, like maybe address that kind of stuff more directly, because that it isn't really done, isn't really built into how it works. That it's like, yeah, like the touring within the country is one thing, but the big thing is that like crossing the border is far harder than it should be. Not at all like reciprocal. Like US bands coming here don't have to go through nearly the same hoops, and it's like it's incredibly expensive, it's incredibly complicated. It's a thing that it's like that we've been kind of finding, which I think is wild when you think about it, is that in a lot of ways, because of the expense and complication of the visas, it almost works out the same to go to Europe. Like it almost makes more sense to fly across an ocean than it does to like drive to New York.
Part of the reason why I say Canada is hard to tour in is just because of how spread out everything is. Obviously, the U.S. is spread out in a different way. One of the benefits of going to Europe is that everything is like relatively tightly packed over there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, relative to North America for sure. Yeah, and like that is a nice thing. It's like it is funny going over there and sort of like finding out what qualifies as a long drive. Like after you've done the like Denver to Kansas City like one trying to make a 4 o'clock sound check, it's like it all seems pretty goofy. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like it's like I don't know. We're grateful to get to do any of it for sure. It's just like yeah, the visa thing with the U.S. is definitely. It just seems like a problem that could be addressed, so it kind of gets to me. It's one of those things that I yeah.
Does that affect you personally though? Because I assume you still have U.S. citizenship.
I don't know. I wasn't in the U.S. long enough to become a citizen. I used to have a green card.
Oh, you weren't born here. Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our drummer's American, which is helpful. But the rest of us are on the visas. Yeah.